A very good evening, a warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick n Pay, and welcome to rather an exciting week. Later this week, I'll be joined by the great Michael Fridjon on a selection of top producers from the Investec Trophy Wine Show. The performances were appraised and those performances announced last week, and there were some outstanding achievers, in particular the Spear Wine Estate. And so later on this week, we shall be championing all of those and speaking to Michael himself, who doubtless shall be shacked up in a rather upmarket wine estate somewhere and giving us some insight onto how this year's awards went. Very much awards season. I think the IWSC Awards out this week as well. And there are more Wine Mag appraisals on the way. In fact, entries are up for grabs for a number of the newest reports. So keep an eye out on those if you are in the wine industry. So that's later this week. But this evening, well, this evening is particularly cool. This evening we head off to Bordeaux and we meet somebody who appears to have literally dozens of jobs. He runs all manner of wine brands, has a particularly well-known estate in Margaux, and just has a really interesting story, and also appears to be pretty much Scandinavia's first minister of France, or something to that effect. He's got a wonderful story, has had an extraordinary journey, and he has a particular love of South Africa. His name is Yann Schÿler, or Schuyler, or Schuler, depending on what part of his heritage you decide to draw from. And Yann is our very special guest today, joining us from Bordeaux. And I'll be picking up with him in just a second. Before we do that, though, let's get some of the latest wine news from this week. Well, coming to Stellenbosch in just a few weeks' time, it is Wine Town Stellenbosch. It's going to be pretty much a full week of revelry. How is that any different to Stellenbosch normally? Well, this is particularly focused with all manner of events. It's going to be a two-day wine town hall on the 5th and 6th of August, the Friday and Saturday. There is going to be a wine walk on Cabernet Sauvignon out at Ernie Els. There's a guided and tutored tasting with Luca Cunningham out at Glenelly. There are restaurant specials. There's food being done by Bertus Besson all over town. There are great hotel specials. It is an almighty celebration of one of the world's great wine capitals. And first week of August, I think, I'll check my dates, Mike Radcliffe, the CEO of Stellenbosch Tourism and Wines of Stellenbosch, will be one of our guests as we preview what looks like a seriously cool few days, even by the high standards of Stellenbosch. If you're anywhere in the area, there is much revelry to be had and a great party just waiting for you to drop in on. So look out for news on that. Also news from the world of bubbles, not champagne, but Cup Classique. There is a new man in charge at Graham Beck. Now, there has been a bit of change at Graham Beck over the last little while. Peter Ferreira, the great Peter Ferreira, has stepped down as cellar master and is now kind of a bubbles master at large. But there's a new man in charge as the CEO, Dave Burford, who you see in the image there, takes over. He spent some time at Heineken, amongst other places. And as of the 1st of July, he's taken over from Chris du Toit, who stays on the Beck family estate boards. One of South Africa's great brands, one of South Africa's great success stories. A big challenge for Dave, but one I'm sure he's relishing, and look out for him on the show in the next few months once he has settled in. Dave Burford, best of luck at the new role. And then the Stellenbosch Cabernet Collective. This is something I will be at. If you would like to attend, come and say hello. This is taking place in Johannesburg. It is at the Mesh Club, which is just below Marble, if you needed to know exactly where it was. And this is happening a little later on this month, the 30th of July. And it is the opportunity to come and taste some great South African Cabernet Sauvignon from the ultimate home of it in South Africa. There'll be a collection of the winemakers making their way up to Johannesburg, and you can go along. There are two sessions. There's a fairly relaxed session in the afternoon between 3 and 5, and then from 4 until 7:30, more than 40 wines to sample, a masterclass on Cabernet Sauvignon, and a very vivid reminder of just why Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon is as good as any. So if you're up in Johannesburg but want a taste of Stellenbosch, and that is one to look forward to. I shall be there. My crew will be there as well. We're doing some filming, tasting some wine, and I suspect having a rather good afternoon, which is exactly what I'm planning to do over the course of the next hour or thereabouts, as a very influential member of the Bordeaux wine community drops in on the show for the very first time. When you get the glowing endorsement of Michael Fridge on, you know you must be doing something right. And Yann Schÿler is certainly doing exactly that. Yann, a very warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks a lot. Very happy to be here with you tonight with our South African friends. So this is the beginning of a summer here. So it is damn hot. And this is going to be a little bit of a refreshment for me to be with you tonight.
I've heard suggestion it's almost 40 degrees in Bordeaux at the moment.
Yeah, well, not quite. We had a heat wave like 10 days ago, dreadful, followed by some hail damage. I had some golf balls in my garden in Bordeaux. Luckily, nothing on the vineyard. But we are coming back to sort of 40 degrees the day after tomorrow, probably. So we'll see whether we have some storms afterwards. We hope not.
All right, some unseasonal weather. If anybody is in a good place to judge it, it is yourself, Yann, with a very long history in this particular part of the world. It's a challenge for me to work out where to start because you do so much and you've had such a remarkable journey. So let's start on I think the longest serving side and the negociant business, which bears your name. Give us the snapshot of that history and what seems to be one of the oldest institutions in Bordeaux.
Indeed, it is. In fact, I am leading a family-owned business, which is called Schröder and Schiller. So actually, I have both names. My name is Schiller Schröder, and the company's name is Schröder and Schiller. The history goes back 1739 under the reign of Louis XV, who was king in France those days. And at that time, two of my ancestors, who were native of Hamburg, one from Hamburg, one from Lübeck, so Schüler was from Hamburg and Schröder was from Lübeck. They decided to create a merchant business in Bordeaux to deal as commissioners between the French West Indies and the Baltic states. In those years, you may be familiar with the fact that around the Baltic, there was a kind of trade union that went back to the 14th century called the Hanseatic League, whereby those city-states, not states, but city that acted as states for themselves, made a sort of trade union between themselves around the Baltic, mainly started in Gotland, in the island of Gotland, which is now part of Sweden. And they decided to create a union between themselves to allow them to deal without taxes. So it was a kind of European union between large cities, not between countries, but between cities of the north. And of course, my ancestors were coming from those cities, and they had this spirit in mind, which means that they were free merchants, they were Protestants, we are still Protestants in a Catholic country. That's life, it's fun. And they had this very, very, very commerce, business-driven mentality, which allowed them to create Schröder and Schiller, so 1739. So to give you an idea, by the time the French Revolution started, 1789, the company was 50 years old. So that tells you today we are 283 years old, not myself, but the company. I am the 8th generation in the business, and I started something like 33 years ago. And I took over the business exactly 25 years ago from my father, who then retired. So it's a very long history. It's a typical history of a merchant company created in Bordeaux more than 200 years ago by Nordic people, by Germans, Anglo-Saxon people. In those days, the French people were not very good businessmen. A lot of the good business people came from England, from Holland, from Denmark, from then Germany, what is today Germany. So this is our history, and we've been going through enormous amounts of wars and hazards and problems, and the Anglo-French war at sea, which prevented us from getting goods from the West Indies. We started as traders for, colonial goods coming from Santo Domingo, Saint-Domingue today, Dominican Republic, which used to be the French Indies, and we imported coffee beans and olive oil and anchovies, colorants, metals, and whatever. And since the Anglo-French War of the 1770s, we started specializing into wine only. And around the French Revolution, when the company was 50 years old, it was nothing but wine. And today we are doing still nothing but wine, not exclusively Bordeaux, but mainly Bordeaux wines. So I try to make a very long story short, but it's very interesting. And as of today, we are one of the few French companies. When I'm saying few, it's like less than 10 companies which are more than 200 years old, in the same family as the founders, and in good health. So that's the story, more or less.
It's a remarkable piece of history and an extraordinary tradition that you are carrying on with this business that has roots in commerce, but now very firmly entrenched in wine. Tell me a bit more about the business today, because when I have a look at the range of wine that you cover, it is enormous, and it's a model which in South Africa we don't really see quite so much. In South Africa, it's a lot more the estates look after themselves, or they have collectives, and out they go. The negotiate model is much more of a French entity, one we're not all that familiar with. So how does this big sprawling business of yours operate, and how tough is it to keep an eye on everything?
So in Bordeaux, with the difficulty with Bordeaux, as you know, is a huge vineyard. It's 100,000 hectares. It's about 5 to 6 million hectoliters a year. So it is on the European scale, even on the world scale, the largest single vineyard of quality wine, because it is 100% AOC. We're not producing, Vin de France or IGP, or very little, like 0.5%. So Bordeaux is a huge vineyard for quality wines. But having said that, there is wines which is entry level, there is wine which is the medium range, and then we have the fine wines. So in Bordeaux, there are companies specializing on the entry level. They do the volumes, it's supermarket driven, and so on. Then you have companies which are specialized on the high end. It's the fine wines, what we call the cru classé. And they do nothing but that. So they just buy and sell. They have warehouses, but they don't bottle any wine. And then we have the middle range, which is the better chateaus, the cru bourgeois, the intermediate chateaus, which are not the entry level, but which are not either the fine wines. And this is also a third category. So in terms of business, we are not specialized. So we cover the three parts of the business. Not on a huge scale, because we are a relatively small company, but we do it with our philosophy. We tend to be very selective. So we have the fine wines, the cru classés, which represent obviously like more than half of our business, almost 2/3 today. So it's quite important, and it gets more and more. And of course, we do a lot of the intermediate chateaus, which is probably about 20% of our business. And then the last remaining bit, which is where we do the most volumes, but not the big part of our turnover, is the inexpensive wines, which we even bottle ourselves. So this is one of the specifics that we have. Not being a huge company, we have our bottling facility, which is a kind of industrial estate that we have created with some colleagues, which bottles for 40 companies in Bordeaux, not only for us, but we bottle for others. So it's a very efficient system, which allows us to have all the quality certifications, yet not having to do millions of cases to be existing on this market. So that means that we buy bulk for those branded wines. Some of them are actually in South Africa, thanks to our friends Michael Fijan and Michael Crossley from Reciprocal Wines. And those wines are tailor-made brands, which we believe in, which are nicely made, very stable, very interesting in terms of price-quality ratio. And this is the entry level that we do in our way, without being industrialists, so to say. So basically, it's not so easy to be a kind of non-specialized company. But I think that our customers in the world, our distributors in all the countries we work with, because we export like 75% of our sales, which is very unusual for Bordeaux. Bordeaux normally is 55% French market and 45% export. So actually we export almost double what a normal company does in terms of percentage. So this is something that most of our customers appreciate, being able to, place an order from us where there will be a bottle of Chateau Margaux, the case of Chateau Margaux or two, a few cases of other fine wines, and then some intermediate wines, and then some branded wines. So that allows an importer to get everything from a few euros to a few thousand euros per bottle.
I know which ones I want. I know which ones I can afford. Sadly, they do not sit in the same category. You mentioned
It
Michael
depends for how
Cross.
long you save. Depends how long you save.
Michael Crossley is watching. Great to see you, Yann, says Michael, amongst our guests on the
Hi,
show,
Michael.
watching
There he
from
is.
around the world. Michael, of course, is here in South Africa. I'm going to ask you about South Africa in a moment. I'm also going to ask you about Margot. But before I do that, while we're on the topic of the different wines that you represent, from a broader Bordeaux perspective, you've been in the family business now for 3 decades and change. What's been the biggest difference from when you started taking Bordeaux to the world to where you find yourself today?
Well, the markets have matured a lot. To be honest, I've seen when I started, like more than 30 years ago, as you said, the European markets were a lot more dynamic than what they are today. So altogether, we have, it's not only us, but what I'm talking about is the Bordeaux market. The Bordeaux market has faced a decrease of its presence on the European markets due to competition from new countries, from exotic countries. You see what I mean? A little bit South Africa, but not so much. Mainly the most aggressive competitors have been, Latin America, Argentina, Chile mainly. Of course, a bit Italy. But the result is that the map of the Bordeaux distribution worldwide has been changing a lot. So Europe has decreased. And then we found a new market, which is called China, if you know what it is. The Chinese market really has started like something like 15 years ago. I remember being in China just 15 years ago, maybe 18 years ago, where we were showing them some bottles of wines and they were wondering, oh, what is this? Is this drinkable? Can we drink it? And all of a sudden they started having the interest. And 10 years ago, China became #1 market for Bordeaux wines. In fact, we did not sell more wine globally, but China has replaced the market shares that we have lost in Europe. So that is more or less what I'm trying to explain to you, which is the big change between when I started and now. So altogether, we are not selling more wine. On the contrary, we tend to produce less because of climate change, because of some frost, some hail, some mildew. It's every 4th year we have a decrease in volumes, which is a problem in Bordeaux. So we have a small harvest in quantity, so which allows us to only sell less than we used to. So the map of Bordeaux now is more towards Asia, China. Japan has been very stable since I started. It has increased a little bit, but not very much. So, and now the biggest challenge for us is the American market. Not because the dollar is stronger today, but because the Americans drink more and more and more and more, and it's going to be the future for us. Europe, we've lost a lot. There is no potential for us anymore on the long term. France is decreasing, so we have to find new markets. It might be India one day, but again, we rely on China a lot. We are the country, the region in France, even in Europe, which relies most on China, because a glass of red wine with a bit of Cabernet from the Médoc or a bit of Merlot from Saint-Emilion, there's nothing better than that for the Chinese, and they are right. So this is what I can say about the changes between then and now.
The challenges of running an international wine brand. China, such an exciting market. Is there more Bordeaux drunk in China than is actually made in Bordeaux? Well, that's a question for another day. Let's instead look at a specific Bordeaux and another part of this vast empire of yours, Yann, and that is Chateau Kirwan. Now, I did French up until O-level at school, and I'm also born in Northern Ireland. I'd have to say Kirwan sounds a little more Irish than it does French. Give me the history of this particular brand.
Oh my God, yes, of course it is Irish. It could not be more Irish. So in fact, we as a family, I told you my background, we are from Northern Germany, now we are French, but our blood, our origins is Northern Germany, Hamburg and Lübeck. So, and we happened to purchase, after 200 years as négociants, as wine shippers, my great-grandfather happened to purchase a fine wine estate, which is called Chateau Kirwan, which is located on the appellation of Margaux. So, but when he bought Chateau Kirwan, the appellation system did not exist, only existed since 1936, sorry. But still, it was in what we call today the Margaux era. Yes, very nice pictures. You see the new cellars. And this estate, came in our family after 200 years of activity. There was a very simple reason. In the turn of the century, of the 20th century, which means in 1902, 1903, just prior to World War I, the chateaus didn't have a better way to sell their harvest than going to the negociants, like my ancestors, my great-grandfather, and to make a contract so that the negociant, along with another 2 or 3 fellow negociant companies, would buy the whole harvest every year on a 5-year contract. And this is a system that was called les achats sur souche. You were purchasing not en primeur, but we were purchasing on the vines themselves before even the grapes were produced, 5 years ahead of time, and defining the price 5 years ahead. So that was quite interesting in those days to be able to fix the price 5 years before, so preventing any inflation, preventing any hiccups on the price. And this is what was being done. That was in the early 1900s. And then came the war. So we started making a few contracts with a few chateaus. I still have those contracts. It's very interesting to read. If you come to my office, I'll show you one day. Even I say this to Michael, he might be interested. He hasn't seen this yet. He needs to come back. And that particular Chateau Kirwan, with which we had a specific contract since 1902, became one of our favorite estates throughout World War I, and especially after the war. After the war, what happened was that the owner of those days, still on contract with us, decided to sell the estate. And my great-grandfather, Yann Schÿler, didn't find a better solution than to buy the estate itself. So that is what happened in 1925. He purchased the estate, of course, at a price which had nothing to do with the prices you have today on fine wine estates. And this estate will be very soon in our family for 100 years, like in 3 years from now. So we count among the very, very oldest owners in Margaux. So we're not only the oldest wine shipping company in Bordeaux, 283 years of existence, but also as owners in the Médoc of a cru glacé, of a fine wine in Margaux, Chateau Kirwan. We count among the oldest owners. So why the name Kirwan? That was your question. Chateau Kirwan, before being called Chateau Kirwan, was called Domaine de la Salle. That was in the 18th century. The owner, Mr. Collingwood, he had an English name, but he was French. He was counselor to the king, Louis XV. We are talking just before the French Revolution. And he had a daughter, Elizabeth Collingwood, and she married Mark Kirwan. Mark Kirwan was, of course, a noble Irishman from the very famous Kirwan family. The Kirwans are from Galway, and they are one of the so-called 14 tribal families of Galway, the tribes of Galway. If you go to Galway on the main square, I'm sure you've been there, Dan, in your childhood, crossing the border, and you see a flag. You have those 14 flags. They are lined up on the square for the 14 tribes of. So you have the Brown, the Darcy, the Lynch, the Kirwans, the other 8, I'm sure. And so the Kirwans belonged to those families who acted throughout the last 500 years as mayors of the county, of the city, judges, doctors, trading people. So they were, people, very gifted people, generals in the army. They were doing the business. They were leading the city. I was invited to Galway a few years ago to meet with the municipality, to meet with the university leadership. They showed me the archives of Galway, and there was a big book which showed the history of the mayors of Galway over 300 years. And I turned the pages. So on one page there was a Lynch, next page there was a Kirwan, and then the Lynch, a Kirwan, a Lynch, a Kirwan, a Lynch, a Kirwan. So they've been kind of alternating the leadership of the city for several hundred years. And of course, when the Irish were persecuted by the English, as you know, there were these, waves of emigration to France, because France was a friend of the Irish Catholic families, and those noble people of Ireland, including from Galway, both the Lynches and the Kirwans, went to Bordeaux. They were merchants, and Mr. Mark Kirwan married the daughter of Mr. Collingwood, who owned Domaine de la Salle, who was to become Chateau Kirwan when they changed the name. Voilà. So they changed the name around the French Revolution. They stayed for hardly a generation. So they had 12 children. And because of 4 bad harvests in the late 1820s, the Kirwan heirs, so Mark Kirwan and his wife, passed away in 1815 and 20, respectively. But their children were not able to keep Chateau Kirwan in their property, in their ownership, so they had to sell it. So they sold it to various families until we arrived in the early 1900s and purchased the chateau like 100 years later, 1925. So that's the story. So we are in charge of that piece of Irish heritage, which we cultivate a lot. We respect it. We have very strong relationships with Ireland, with distributors there. I go to Galway on a regular basis, and when you say Kirwan, you are the king in Ireland. You are with a good wine.
My mother usually watches this show. I need to find out if our family tree has got any Kirwans in it. See if I can make any claim to a piece.
And it's it's the same family, because there's only one Kirwan family.
Sadly, I suspect we won't be part of it, but I shall try nonetheless, with fingers firmly crossed, because it would be lovely to think I was part of not just a terrific estate, but also a terrific part of the wine world. For our largely South African audience, give us a little bit more of an understanding of the status of both Chateau Kirwan and the surrounds. You're what is called a third growth. What does that mean? And why is Margaux as an area so important, so influential, and just so good at making outstanding wine?
Yes, you were talking about Cabernets from Stellenbosch. We can do Cabernets as well. We can. No, actually, what is so fantastic, and I will start with the terroir. The terroir is a combination between the soil, the climate, and what you do with those two. So the rules, what is allowed, what is forbidden. And this is what an appellation is. So the Margaux appellation is fantastic. It is on the left bank. So left bank is anything that's Medoc, which is north of Bordeaux all the way to the tip of the peninsula. And as you drive north, the peninsula becomes narrower and narrower, with the estuarine on the right-hand side and the ocean on the left-hand side. So there is a microclimate. And on the southern part, you have Margaux, which produces what is considered as being the most elegant wines of this Medoc Peninsula. So starting on the south, you have Margaux, then you have Saint-Julien, then you have Pauillac and Saint-Estèphe. So the more you go to the north, the more masculinity you find in the wines, the more Cabernet Sauvignon you find also. We do have lots of Cabernet in Margaux. It's still the main grape variety that we grow, but not 80-90% like in the north. It would do like 40-60% in Margaux. Because we have veins of clay in the underground, we tend to have a bit more Merlot than what they do in Saint-Julien and Pauillac and Saint-Estèphe. So therefore, Margaux is a combination of both power, thanks to the Cabernet Sauvignon, and softness and elegance. And we dare say that the wines of Margaux are the most feminine wines of Bordeaux, and especially of the Medoc. So we are the so-called ladies, the charming ladies of Bordeaux, and we like this positioning a lot. So this is exactly what you can say about Margaux. Remember that Margaux, in terms of size, is 1% of Bordeaux. Bordeaux is 1,000 hectares. Bordeaux is 100,000 hectares, and Margaux is only just above 1,000 hectares. So it is very small. It is what we call a communal appellation. Communal level is the highest level of appellation, way above, things like Haut-Médoc, Médoc, which is the intermediate level, and then the basic level, which is the base, which is the Bordeaux appellation. So we are very lucky to be there. We are very, very near the estuarine of the Gironde, just less than 1 kilometer, which provides us with a local microclimate, and yet 40 kilometers from the Atlantic Ocean, which gives us a lot of mildness. It can be very warm in the summer, but the winters are never cold. So, and we just have enough precipitations. And with the soil, which drains itself tremendously, like when it rains, the water goes through, never stays on the roots. So the roots get a little bit what they need, but not too much. So the only thing we may suffer of is hydric stress when there is not enough water. So, but luckily, we are never in the red zone, in the danger zone with the hydric stress, which usually happens in the end of August when we've had a very, very hot summer. So this is what Margaux is about. And your other question was, because I talk too much. The classification. Yes.
Correct.
Well, the classification is quite important to us because we have something which is unique, which a lot of other regions are dreaming of, which is the famous 1855 classification. And by definition, this classification cannot and will not be changed. No way. A lot of people say, yes, classification, the chateaux that were classified 150 years ago are not worth the same, or some are better, some are worse, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, that's fine. Then it is the market that does that kind of classification today, like supply demand does such that there are some, fifth growth, which are selling at a higher price than the second growth, and that's fine. And that's the free market economy that we live with, which creates those differences. And this is where we see the challenge. The classification was made on the demand of then emperor, French last emperor, Napoleon III, who very intelligently had the idea to give a focus to the Médoc wines for the World Exhibition of Paris 1855. So there was, of course, a French pavilion, and he said, oh, there's very fine wines in Bordeaux, so why not make a kind of ranking with first growth, second, third, fourth, and fifth. So altogether, 60 plus chateaus were included in that classification. The main focus on the classification was the pricing of those days. Of course, wine selling at the highest price became the first growth, and then the next step became the second growth. And Chateau Kirwan was classified as first of the third growth. So we are on top of the list of the troisième cru classé, which gives us a very interesting status, which we love, which we stick to. That's fine. But, it is like, I usually want to explain to people what it is. It's like the classical monuments. You are a classical monument because you are part of the history. But if you don't maintain your classical monument, it can be a ruin as well. So that means that the classification of 1855 is not a question of the taste of the wine, the price of the wine, or whatever. Then it's up to the owner of such an estate to do its best, to do the best possible quality. It's like running a Formula One car. You need to be the best car in the race in order to claim the highest possible price on the market, be more expensive than your neighbors, and be more consistent, and so on. So this is the kind of race we're in. So of course, all the fine wines, all of them, with no exception, are producing beautiful products, but each has its own history. So our job, when we wake up in the morning, is not to say, hey, I am the co-owner of third growth. My wish is to be a second growth. No, we don't care. We could not care less. The only thing we are striving to is to create added value, and show that we can improve the quality by using small improvements. We're working on small details in the vineyards, in the shade. Sometimes we make huge investments. You very kindly showed some nice pictures of our new cellar while I was presenting myself in the beginning. And this is it. Voila, exactly. So you see, this is the latest investment from 2015, which is a huge investment for us, but which is allowing us to work on very, very small details in order to always improve the quality. And this is our challenge. Improve every day. Improve this, improve that, in order to get that fruit as pure as possible into the tanks and do minimal vinification, winemaking, something really minimal, So the wine is very, very genuine, very natural, with very little intervention and very, very respectful of the terroir. So this is what it is to be a cru glacé. So in fact, it is a lot terroir understanding. We need to understand what is going on in the soil, like 10, 12 meters deep. A lot of respect for the fruit, trying to preserve the integrity of the beautiful fruits that we have, because we have virtually the best terroirs for Cabernet Sauvignon that exists on this planet for geological reasons. It's not a mystery. We are able to produce volumes of fine wines in Bordeaux that nobody else in other parts of the world can do. So this asset, we have to keep improving it all the time, because you can always do better, even though you are a classified growth.
Melissa Sutherland summing up what I think most people will be thinking at the moment. Thanks for the great explanation, says Melissa, who I think is actually in Bordeaux visiting at the moment. And you're extremely well placed to give this explanation, Yann, not just because of your time spent in your assorted businesses, but if I'm not mistaken, you sit on the board of the Union of Bordeaux, and you're also part of the committee that oversees the appellation rules and makes sure everybody's behaving themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I do. Actually, where I'm talking to you right now, I am at my office at the CIVB, which is a Bordeaux Trade Council, because I just had a general assembly just before we called each other. So I am calling you from the heart of Bordeaux, where we manage the Bordeaux production, the relationship between the producers and the shippers, and it is happening here at the CIVB, Bordeaux Trade Council. Yes, and also I am sitting at this authority in Paris, which is the INAO, Institut National des Appellations d'Origine, which is the body which is state-controlled, which is belonging to the state, that steers all the appellations of France. Whenever an appellation is wanting to change its rules, like change the way to prune, change the yield, add a new grape variety, for instance. So it is all discussed in Paris with representatives from the trade and the production vineyards from all over France. So I've been doing this for 20 years now. So it's very interesting. And actually, I'm specializing on Burgundy and Champagne, because you cannot be, required to be the expert on your own region. You have to be neutral. So you are sent to other regions of France. I was actually last week in Burgundy for that, 2 days, just to sort other people's problems.
Don't let anybody know, Yann. You might lose your spot on the Bordeaux Board of Control. We mentioned a moment ago, Chateau Kirwan, its Irish origins. My mother is indeed watching, with bad news for me, I'm afraid, Yann. Nickel, no Kirwans, sadly, darling. Just lots of gamblers, drinkers, artists, and other reprobates.
That's too bad. But at least you will be very welcome to visit us and have a taste of Chateau Kirwan at Chateau Kirwan.
Well, of course, you can drink Chateau Kirwan here in South Africa, because this is one of the countries with whom you have a very fond relationship, Yann.
Yes.
That is via our good friend Michael. Tell me about your first encounter with both South Africa and with the famous Mr. Frijon.
The famous Mr. Frijon. Actually, I met him through common friends in Burgundy. Everything starts in Burgundy, not always in Bordeaux. No, actually, I think that's a long time ago now. It's more than 25 years, I would say, but we met through common friends. And then, of course, as you know, Michael Frijon is a true gentleman. He has a bit of Irish blood, as you know.
Correct.
Even quite a lot. And then we became friends right away, and we started trading together. And I've been doing some tastings in South Africa various times. The last time was a bit long ago, so maybe I should come back at some stage. He will probably be listening to that, so I will be receiving an invitation anytime soon. And yes, South Africa is a very nice country because you are wine producers. I usually tend to like South African wines a lot, much better than other countries like in Latin America, because I think the Chenin Blanc and Pinotage is a bit of controversy, but I like the style. I like different things. I like what you can do, which is your own. Of course, you have fantastic Cabernets and other things, but a lot of vineyards, things that I have seen in South Africa are very interesting to me. And, having friends in South Africa like Michael Friedgen and Michael Crossley is a true asset to me. And it's not only business when I do business with my South African friends, it's also pleasure. And when you are in that branch, you have to do things with pleasure. Otherwise, you have to change. You have to change business.
You've clearly got a wonderful relationship with the Michaels. In fact, Michael Crossley, who's watching, says, always welcome. We need to launch the new vintages. So hopefully we will see you soon. It leads into probably, Yann, the question I was most interested in asking you this evening. And that's one for, again, our South Africans who are watching, who have some sense of Bordeaux, some understanding, certainly an appreciation of the broader heritage and history and splendor of the wines of Bordeaux, but generally tend to access it through the Bordeaux blend that comes out of Stellenbosch or some of our other regions. So we know the style, but perhaps haven't really drunk a great deal of Bordeaux itself. What, from your perspective, as someone who knows the wines of Bordeaux better than most, what would be your guidance to somebody in South Africa who's watching this thinking, I'd like to try some Bordeaux, I'd like to get into it, I'd like to get a bit of understanding. What's the best way to dip your toe into Bordeaux and to start to get a feel for this magical wine area?
So as a beginner, so in Bordeaux, imagine we have 57 appellations contrôlées, which means we have 57, typical regions. So when you've said that, it sounds like a nightmare to try and discover that huge area. But let's make it very simple. There is 4 regions you have to focus on, 4 things you have to remember, not more, just to start with. Once you've done that, you know more than most French people do. The first thing is you have to taste an entry-level Bordeaux, red or white, or both, whatever, anything that says Bordeaux. Bordeaux red, Bordeaux white, even Bordeaux rosé. I'm not so keen on those rosés from Bordeaux. Is better in the south of France, but red and white, and this is like 60% of the production of Bordeaux. I do 4 or 5 brands from this area, and you have wines which are the whites are driven by the Sauvignon Blanc, so they're very crispy, very aromatic, and they don't cost so much. They cost sometimes a fraction of what those similar wines would cost in some southern hemisphere countries. I'm not talking about South Africa. So the whites are very, very, very good price quality ratios, and the reds are on the fruity style. It's very easy to drink. Sometimes a bit light, but they are charming. They're round, supple, and when they're well made, you have a glass of red wine which fits to anything. So that's the base. Once you have done that, you have to go first right bank, and then you go left bank. What does it mean? If you go right bank, you go to the area which is Saint-Émilion, Pomerol, Fronsac, those Montagnes Saint-Émilion, Puy-Seguin. Right bank is the area in Bordeaux where the soil consists of clay. And on the clay, you grow Merlot. So those wines are made with 90% Merlot across the board. There's quite a few appellations around. And if you taste the right bank wines, you will be experiencing, mostly Merlot with this cherry type roundness, wines which are very frank, very round, supple, very matured tannins, very dark color, but wines which are more consistent, more tasteful than the basic Bordeaux reds that I mentioned just before. So that's the right bank. And then you will go to the left bank, which is the opposite. It's only 30 kilometers apart. But once you're on the left bank, which is where Margaux is, Margaux, Pauillac, Saint-Estèphe, Saint-Julien, you don't necessarily have to taste those communal wines, but then you can also go and taste a Médoc or a Haut-Médoc or a Listrac or a Moulis. Now I've given you all the names from the left bank. And from the left bank, this is the kingdom of Cabernet Sauvignon. There you have probably the best Cabernet Sauvignons of the world, honestly, on a huge surface, on a huge area, which is the left bank of the Garonne River. This is why we call it the left bank. So, and once you've experienced those, wines from what we call the Médoc Peninsula overall, starting in Margaux, finishing in the appellation Médoc, you really feel you can do with the Cabernet Sauvignon from different terroirs, different variations, of course. If you're in Pauillac, it's not the same as in Haut-Médoc. If you're in Saint-Estèphe, it's not quite the same as Moulis or Listrac. So that is the third region. And then the fourth, I would take my car and would drive way south of Bordeaux to a region, I'm sure, and I know that you in South Africa love those wines. It is the dessert wines, the famous dessert wines. Why do I say that? It's because if you go to the Rhone, if you go to Burgundy, there is none of those wines. There is a bit of wines like this in the Loire Valley, of course, in Alsace. But those dessert wines, we have like 11 appellations for dessert wines. Of course, the most famous ones are Sauternes and Barsac, but also you have Loupiac, Sainte-Croix-du-Mont, Montbazillac is in Bergerac. You have Loupiac, you have Sainte-Croix-du-Mont, you have Les Premières Côtes de Bordeaux, etc., etc. And all those appellations are making fantastic botrytis wines made with mainly the Sémillon grape. And of course, you have the Cru Classé of Sauternes, the most famous of which being Chateau Kirwan. There is about 25 classified growths, which are the elite of the dessert wines of Bordeaux, if not France. So this is also a very important specifics about Bordeaux, which absolutely a South African wine drinker has to discover. And that's it, to make things simple. And then we can go into details. But those four areas are the main focus areas in my view.
One of the advantages of the way we do this show is you can watch it live, but you can also watch it recorded. I would advise that you go back, have a notebook, and watch this several times over if you're looking to get into Bordeaux, because Yann has just given you the perfect introduction to it, and also suggested where you might want to get over should you get to France for a visit. And that does sound like a wonderful, wonderful trip, which would, of course, include a visit to Chateau Kirwan, where, amongst other things, Yann, as we come to the end of the show, sadly, would be the opportunity to discuss one other element of the greater family, and that's related, I think, to champagne, because would I be right in saying that if we climbed along the family tree a little, we might bump into the name Krug at some point?
Yes, and of course, today, as we speak, it has nothing to do with the company Krug and the owners of Krug, which is LVMH. But it used to be, because my late mother, who was the eldest of 5 children, married my father in 1956, and she moved to Bordeaux. And of course, she was raised, and she was the eldest daughter of Paul Krug, who was then managing the famous House of Krug, which in those days was family-owned. So it's not the case anymore. So again, it's only the family we are talking about. So yes, I have roots from Champagne, which is quite a decent champagne. No, I'm joking. It is the champagne. Of course, it is the king. There's not the only one, but it's one of the, of course. When you were born and raised with a bottle of Krug, you are more than a Krugist. You have this in your blood, and it gives you the tone of what is a good champagne. So I love champagne. My grandfather used to say this wine is fantastic. He used to call it a wine. Nobody in France calls champagne a wine, but it is a wine. So at home, at my grandfather's home, we were drinking champagne decanted in a carafe at the big family lunches or dinners, celebrations. And we were enjoying it, with a meal, with food. And this is what it takes when the champagne is a real fine champagne. So, but I know that Michael Friedgen and Michael Crossley are champagne lovers. I was, in fact, once invited to a fantastic weekend, a Sunday brunch in Johannesburg, where I had one of my most extraordinary champagne experiences, and it was in South Africa. Of course, it was not a matter of Krug. It was a matter of a lot of the extraordinary cuvées that Michael is distributing, and I have such a fine memory of that Sunday brunch. It was like 6-7 years ago. Fantastic experience. So champagne on that level is one of the very best produce you can have.
There are, of course, rumours that Michael Fridjon baths in a tub full of Krug every Sunday morning, but we can neither confirm nor deny those. Last one for you, Yann, and I think we're going to have you back on the show because it's been an absolute delight chatting to you. The one space I can't quite get my head around, so you're going to have to explain it to me. You are a German Frenchman running an Irish vineyard in France, but you also happen to be, as far as I can understand, basically the King of Norway and the King of Sweden's official designate in France, or thereabouts. Talk me through this Scandinavian role that you have.
Let us use the right words. I am the honorary consul of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway in Bordeaux and the southwest of France. So basically, this is also part of the family tradition, because Denmark has been represented by my family since 1831, so it's almost more than 180 years, that the consulate has been hosted by the company, and the consul was the head of the company. So I have seen my great-grandfather, my grandfather, my father being consuls for 30, 40 years and plus. And when my father retired, he proposed me as his successor, like 22 years ago, which I accepted because I happened to have learned Danish as a kid. It's part of the family tradition. So I am representing Denmark. My boss is the ambassador, even though I am appointed by the head of state, which is the Queen of Denmark in that case, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and same for Sweden and Norway. So basically, we handle the consular affairs with the passports, with the elections, and newborn kids. So all the official papers that have to be issued for the Scandinavians who live here in the region. So this is what I deal with the full credit from the embassy, with all that it takes. So usually when the country appoints someone to be a honorary consul, someone has to be a serious person, because you cannot fool around. So, but this is part of our family heritage. It's a mission. We are not paid for that. It's a purely benevolent mission. But I have been brought up in that spirit, with that mentality, like you do your thing, you do your business, but also you have to do things for others. So sometimes it's, we have to go and visit prisoners, this is part of the job. But sometimes I have some VIPs coming over, like a head of state, a king, a queen. It happens, or a prince, or a minister, or an ambassador. So it's very diverse, and it's, again, we are not paid for that, but it's, the most important thing is we run into very, very nice people. So we meet interesting people, and that's what life is about.
Yann, you lead an absolutely fascinating life, and it's been wonderful getting a snapshot of it on the show today. I shall add to my list of things to do with you, pairing some herring with a glass of Chateau Kirwan when I'm over in Bordeaux. And hopefully we get to see you perhaps later this year. I see Michael Crossley's been suggesting it, but as and when you do get back to South Africa, I know you're a lover of the bush and a lover of South African red wine and a bit of red meat. Yeah. Hopefully we can share some of those with you, and a glass or two of Bordeaux as well.
I hope I can take some photos of some animals, because I am an amateur photographer. So I love safaris, because I have several thousand photos of your fantastic wildlife, which I love so much.
Well, we will guarantee that. We'll even let you take some photos of Michael Fridjon in a bath of champagne, just to complete the wildlife that you have on camera. Yann, thank you. It's been a delight catching up with you, discovering a bit more about Bordeaux and what makes it tick, and about your assorted businesses and roles. Melissa Sutherland extending an invitation. Come on a wine safari, says Melissa. I don't think Yann will need too much persuasion to do that. Yann, good luck with the heat in Bordeaux. Good luck with your next vintage. Good luck with booking those flights to South Africa. Let us know when they're confirmed. We look forward to having you here, and thanks for what's been an absolutely lovely evening with you. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Dan, and thank you so much for all the listeners. It was a pleasure being in South Africa this evening. Thanks a lot.
So there we go. A man with a long and rich family history in Bordeaux as négociants, now as the owners of Chateau Kirwan, as the official designate of 3 different Scandinavian countries, and a great friend of South Africa, as you heard through the course of the hour. And I suspect we'll be seeing Yann over with a reciprocal team before too long. An understanding of Bordeaux, and if you weren't already itching to get over and spend some time in the great French wine capital, well, I think now you should be just about ready to book those flights and head over. And that wraps up what's been a lovely way to get the week going with Yann on today's show. I'll be back live on Thursday when, together with Michael Frigion, who's been name-checked multiple times this evening, we'll have a look at some of those top performers in the Investec Trophy Wine Show. Amongst them, JD Pretorius will be joining us from Warwick. We'll catch up with Bruce Jack from Bruce Jack Wines. His Shiraz did magnificently, 98 points from Michael and his team of judges. Paul Kluber, whose Chardonnay was a standout performer, will also be joining us, and Karina Hoos from Kleiner Zalza, plus Spear, celebrating their best on-show trophy amongst several others. And for the magazine show that goes live tomorrow, look out for some rugby. Tendai the Beastum Tawarera has launched a brand new wine range, and Ciabella Sinatla, the 7-star, launched his last year. We'll have both of them on that show tomorrow. For now, a huge thank you to Yann and the Michael and Michael team at Reciprocal for setting up a lovely evening as we delved into Bordeaux. I'll see you live again on Thursday for some more great wine. Until then, goodbye. To join the Pick and Pay Wine Club, simply SMS your smart shopper number to 36775. It's absolutely free, and you'll get for yourself 3 times the smart shopper points on every bottle of wine bought. You'll also get a 20% discount on 10 different wines each month, a 25% discount on a case of wine, and a Magnum, some terrific competitions and invitations to awesome events.